same thing. If I can.
Yeah, and that.
All right, so much for punctual Pyotr, as some of you were joking. Guys, we were ready to go, but then we were having a deliberation on what to focus the video or stream about. I thought it was going to be about Iran, so I had titled most of my platform title captions with Iran. But as we've seen in the past few days, things have relatively to the previous week settled. And that's not to me say that things are good in Iran. We will be talking about Iran later in the stream, but we're going to focus on Greenland, NATO, and the United States to start with, because that seems to be the right, as it stands, hot issue. And then we'll come to Iran later on in the stream. So if you guys want to talk about expecting us to cover both, we will. There will also be obviously references to Venezuela and many other things. But thank you for joining us, everyone. If you're just coming on straight, those of you who know me, you'll know Michael, you'll know James, hopefully, but we can introduce ourselves if we wish. But I think it's probably important that we just get on to the situation, because as it stands, we really could be looking at the fragmentation of NATO over this. I mean, we can each say our pieces and get into a debate, but I don't know which of you guys wants to start or take this away. But
I'll jump in on this one.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, as you say, you know, things have been moving incredibly quickly. I mean, a few days ago, Iran was really front page news. I think we will come on to it. My sense, just in brief, is that the regime lives to fight another day, unfortunately. So I think, but the really, really big news, at least viewed from this side of the Atlantic, is the upping of all the rhetoric on Greenland. So, you know, we know since even before Trump came back into office that Greenland was something that had been high on his agenda. I think a lot of us had felt that it was sort of a mixture of some sort of vague aspiration and sort of high grade trolling. But it does really seem that it's very, very high on the Trump agenda. That this is very much tied in with Trump seeing this as some sort of legacy. It was quite. It seemed to be bubbling up at the start of the administration, this second term. Then it went quiet for a while, but it really has come back with a vengeance. And, you know, remembering, of course, that I think in many ways what seemed to have kicked off this phase was the message on Twitter X, whatever we're calling it, by Katie Miller, the wife of Stephen Miller, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, with this map. We talked about it in the previous live stream. This map she put up of Greenland, with, you know, the US flag superimposed on it. But it just seems to have been building up. Trump is not backing down on this. And then, of course, what we saw is this announcement that he was slapping extra tariffs on countries that were sending small token troop reinforcements to Greenland. And I mean, we really are talking token numbers. I can't remember, with Germany, it was either 8 or 13 or something very, very small.
No, that's the total number, James. It's 13 for Germany, 1 for Britain, 1 for Denmark. I think the French were generous.
Yeah, I mean, it literally is. It's just a token symbolic just to say, look, we standing by the allies. And then, of course, what Trump does is that he then says he's going to slap tariffs on these countries, of which the UK is one of them. So all across, I mean, the political divide, there's a very interesting debate about this, because, you know, this is sort of saying, one, was Starmer right to try and appease Trump? You know, so much for the special relationship. But of course, in Europe, this is really going to force a response, because trying to impose tariffs on a certain number of EU member states was simply standing by another EU member state. And for European countries as a whole, the idea that they're going to be punished because you have the United States, which is threatening to seize and annex the territory of another NATO member, is just remarkable. And I think my sense, and I'll sort of hand over to you guys in just a sec, but I mean, what I would say is that, we've seen for the past year, and I keep coming back to this, that Europe has not really taken on board the magnitude of what is happening. It seems to be, it's been very fragmented. Europe doesn't have a great tradition, as we know, of being terribly united. I mean, you have the European Union, but on foreign policy issues, it's always been a case that, it's not as united as it needs to be. And we've had these sort of moments over the past year where it looks like Europe is finally getting the message that it needs to be far more united. It needs to take security much more seriously, needs to take its defense much more seriously. Then they look like they've won over Trump and everyone breathes a sigh of relief, and then not a lot happens. My sense is we are probably at the moment now where it is finally sinking in that the United States under Donald Trump is no longer a reliable ally. In fact, it's worse than that. It's in fact become an opponent of everything that Europe stands for. And the question now is how can Europe respond to this? What are the effective measures that it can take economically, diplomatically, militarily even, in order to fend this off? But I guess also the other big question is, what is Trump going to do about Greenland? Is he really, can we see him stepping in militarily and doing something?
No. Just no. I'll pass to you in a second, Michael, but I've got more things to say, but I'll pass to you since I introduced. But I do want to make one quick comment, which is that the sort of the facade, the circus that we can see happening around Greenland, I think is a reflection of what's been happening around Ukraine, and the sort of 5 times we've seen this charade where Trump will make a comment about Zelensky, Europeans will rush to Zelensky's defense, Trump and Putin will talk, and they'll say they're close to a deal. Europeans will then panic and make a counter proposal. Macron, Starmer, Merz, Zelensky will be in the White House or whatever. There's smiles, there's big tables, there's no progress though. And then there's missiles and drones hitting Kiev. Trump is frustrated with Putin, and then nothing happens. Repeat. Point being is that the Europeans are always playing reaction instead of being proactive. And they never seem to learn, be that over Ukraine or in things now like with Greenland. But Michael, that's just my little bit.
I mean, I am certainly going to jump off of James's excellent assessment of the situation. I mean, this is exactly where we find ourselves less than 3 weeks into 2016. And the whole Greenland topic is just part of a larger collection of just aggressive foreign policy statements that the Trump administration has been issuing, whether it's Venezuela or Cuba, certainly Greenland, the possibility of regime change in Iran. I think, what was it, about a week and a half ago, Trump had his own l'état c'est moi moment where he had stated in front of the cameras that he is driven only by his own opinions, his own convictions. There is nothing that stops him from this. It's a complete and absolute disregard for the constitutional checks and balances within the United States. We need to also take one extra thing into account here, and it's very tempting. It's very tempting to just simply pin all of this on Donald Trump, who many regard as just somebody that is haphazard, reckless, and impulsive, and rarely follows through with many of his threats. And it seems to me on this side of the pond that Trump is the spokesperson for a good number of other deep-seated interests within the administration. We have to take into account here the ambitions of J.D. Vance, of Marco Rubio, of Pete Hegseth, of Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, for that matter, although he's no longer an insider in Trump's inner circle. and the idea that Trump and John Bolton don't see eye to eye, but John Bolton has always salivated at the prospects of regime change in a number of rogue states, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba being three others. We have to think about whether or not this is just all Trump being the Nero of the day, or whether this is a collection of war hawks that have decided that now is the time to change the reality of the geopolitical world, knowing a couple of things. A, the world is gravitating towards regional hegemonic spheres of influence, Russia's sphere, China's sphere, and the US's sphere, which has laid claim to almost all of the Western Hemisphere. Right, so it's like Monroe Doctrine 2.0, in which Greenland is now seen in the same type of I get as America first dibs on its fates, like we have towards Latin America. And the second thing to understand is that Europe can, and I'll just say this right here, right now, Mark Rutte, who last I checked is the General Secretary of NATO, if he hasn't done this already, he needs to say, in no uncertain circumstances about Greenland, if the United States makes a play on Denmark's territorial integrity, he will, if not him, he will allow Denmark to call in Article 5. Okay, the only thing that will absolutely halt Trump and his administration at this point is military deterrence. That's it. That's it.
You sure?
Am I sure?
Are you sure?
I feel that if he had the military capability, of invading Venezuela instead of just simply capturing Maduro, does he have the military capability of taking Greenland? Yes, he does. But does he have any real visible deterrence?
Frankly, the three of us probably have the military capability.
Just so we all know, the dynamics of Greenland have changed as well. The German contingent that was there, James, have now been ordered to go home.
That's not true. That was a misinformation.
Are you sure? Okay, then I could be mistaken on that.
I mean, look, the reality is, look, it's what it seems is that one of the views that I've seen expressed, which is probably fairly accurate, is Trump is going all in for the buying Greenland option, with the threats, the military threats and everything, and then putting on the tariffs and everything, is trying to get that. We've seen the fact that Greenland and Denmark and the United States have been negotiations. Denmark has said the ones that took place this week went very badly. So this just seems part and parcel of that process of just sort of upping the tension in the hope that eventually just Denmark capitulates and says, right, okay, it's yours, or some sort of agreement, face-saving agreement that you have a referendum, but the referendum option is for a free association, independence and free association with the United States. But, it does seem that this is all backfiring, that the Greenlanders themselves would either prefer independence or, given the option, would prefer to remain under Danish sovereignty. And of course, what was interesting, of course, is that Greenland left the European Union as part of Denmark. It should, and it was part of the European Union. It left that. I could see it's far more likely that it might want to take the option to rejoin under Danish sovereignty. But of course, that would then mean the end of its sort of independence aspirations. I mean, I suppose you could conceive of Greenland joining the European Union as an independent state, but I think the European Union would be very, very reluctant to do that. I mean, its population is only about 36,000 or something like that. It would make it the smallest EU state by a considerable margin. Malta is currently the smallest member state, and that's sort of I think about 350,000 people. So it would be just 10% of the size of Malta. Yeah. And I don't think the European Union would want that, because, it would then have its own commissioner. It would have 6 seats in the European Parliament, all of these things. So I think the interesting option now is, are we actually going to see the Greenlanders sort of say, right, okay, for our security, we really need to have a closer relationship with Europe as a whole?
Yeah, so the population of Greenland is 56,000. I believe the smallest country in the EU or Europe more broadly, is Iceland. Is around what, 100?
Iceland. Well, I mean, in the European Union, the smallest member of the European Union is Malta.
Yeah. But yeah, just a couple of things. So this is a man who accepts the Peace Nobel Prize from Maria Machado at lunch, instead of doing the honorable thing of, well, not getting it in the first place, but saying, no, you keep it for the Venezuelan people. He's like, yeah, I'll take that stuff. And then he grins like an orangutan holding a sort of banana or something, a picture of a banana, while Maria Machado is sort of standing there. And the fact that we've got to this point where she has to placate his ego to such an extent, I mean, it makes me question her moral standing to an extent.
Likewise. It was somebody pointed out, by the way, if it would technically be it belongs to the US government, not Trump personally.
No, it wouldn't either. No,
I think it's fairly safe to say no one's ever going to see that again.
No, but it's not even his, and it's never going to be seen as his. But the Venezuelan people have gifted it. The point with that is that this is the kind of individual we're talking about. So when James tries to rationalize him or offer a degree of sort of rationalization,
no, I don't offer any rationalization. I think we're well beyond that. I think the one thing I will say, though, which I do think drives him, is this fact that he is, as pointed out time and time again, he's a real estate person. This is what he understands. He thinks of territory. He just forget all the security stuff that the United States. It's a Danish territory. It's part of NATO anyway. So all this Russia or China will take it if the United States isn't there. That is absolute nonsense.
Russia can't take Ukraine, so they're not going to be able to take Greenland.
Yeah. So exactly. So all this is about Trump, and as Michael had mentioned, the Monroe Doctrine 2.0. This is about Trump being the president who will go down in history as having added new territory to the United States. And as a real estate man, this is all that really is driving him, I think.
They've got a new real estate deal in the form of Venezuela. But if I can finish my point, what I think is happening here is quite clearly an attempt to use coercion to get the economic arrangement that Trump thinks he can have, the physical and the entire control, if you like, through extension, of the Western Hemisphere, right? We've seen this in, 1984, where you've got Russia controlling the broader Eurasia sphere, you've got America controlling the Americas, and then China controlling much of the global South. Although I find it confusing that sort of no one's talking about Africa. But anyway, I think when it comes to Greenland, what the Trump administration are hoping to do, or I think the sort of the broader State Department, is try to push the Greenlanders towards this succession, with the idea that they can then bypass Denmark completely. So it doesn't even therefore have to worry about NATO and the whole alliance. But if they can incentivize the Greenlanders to seek independence, that they can deal with them directly. And therefore, it's a much simpler sort of matter of diplomatic dealing. But the problem is that the Greenlandians are not playing ball. They are basically, as you've said, both of you, clearly, they are either wanting complete autonomy or independence, or prefer to stay as part of the European sphere, which doesn't work for the Trump administration. Therefore, we get back to this use of tariffs. That seems to be the fallback that Trump always reverts to whenever he's unsure exactly of how to manage the situation. And to particularly the British example, which I think is what needs to be most underlined here, is that the British government, particularly under Starmer, have done such a hard job of trying to placate. Unlike Macron, who tries to go toe-to-toe with Trump, Starmer has been so willing to basically allow the US administration to walk all over him. We've now got the situation where the Foreign Office is saying, oh, we're going to negotiate with the Trump, we're going to deal with them over this situation to avert this tariff imposition. They're still using the same rhetoric from even a year ago, where it's like, no, we're going to try and deal with the Trump. No, stop trying to deal with them, Britain, and take them as what they are, which is not a friend. And I hate to say this, fellow Americans who are watching, who are of normal mind and sound. Europe needs to wake up. We said this even before in Venezuela happened, right? I'm a principled pragmatist now, in the sense of like, Europe needs to wake up. We seriously need to stop pretending like it's the same old, holding out for when a more, constructive individual comes back into the White House, and behave not as things we'd like them to be, but as they actually are. Because right now, Europe is being stamped on left, right, and center. And this, I think it's an insult, actually, that we are sending 13 or 50 troops to Greenland. I don't understand. Let's actually send some troops there. The fact that we're still not doing it demonstrates to me that Europe is still not willing to take the step of sticking two fingers up at the Trump administration and making it clear that this has gone far enough. We're still trying to sort of, play a delicate balancing act for the hope of, that the US will return in the future. It's mind-boggling that Europe is not willing. Michael, you probably want to have all sorts to say.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I started out this conversation today by saying the best way to oppose Trump, the best way to resist him, is full-on military deterrence. Sending a token force to Greenland for a couple of days and then withdrawing half of your troops does nothing. I mean, all it does is it shows Rubio, Hegseth, Vance, and Trump that Europe is just putting up some token resistance. And ultimately, what they seem to have decided on shortly after New Year is that they are going to act unilaterally, and the world can react, the world can oppose, but as long as they don't militarily oppose, what are you going to do about it? I mean, this is ultimately what it is. What are you going to do about it? If that isn't the slap in the face that Europe desperately needs to realize that this special relationship is over. And look, I'm the American right here. I'll be the first to tell you, please, please, please do not think that things are going to go back to normal when Trump leaves. Because at the absolute best, that's in 3 years. Just look at what Trump has been able to do in less than 20 days, just in this year alone. The fact that we are now talking about Greenland, of all places, and whether or not he follows through on this is something that he's got 3 years to consider. He does not have to do anything about it. All he has to do is keep this up in the air. And I've said this before on this podcast. I've said it, in other places. I teach a course on conflict resolution at the undergraduate and at the graduate level. And the first thing that I say, day one, the first rule of conflict resolution, the first inconvenient truth, is that reality is dictated by the most insane person in the room. Congratulations, everyone. We all know who that is. And all Trump has to do is just muse about incursion here, regime change there, supporting, protesters in another country over there, like they actually care about human rights, and, calling for them to resist authority while clamping down on, what's happening in Minneapolis and effectively saying, do what you're told and you won't get shot in the face. Is Trump controlling the discourse? He is controlling the communication, and he has successfully managed to divide Europe to the point where some are calling for full-on resistance against Trump, and others, as you just rightly pointed out, saying, well, let's talk to him. The minute that you decide to talk to him is the minute that he wins the debate, because he now controls the reality. And so even if he had no plans whatsoever to militarily take over Greenland, if he just simply plays Europe's bluff and Europe decides to make some concessions just for the sake of maintaining Denmark's territorial integrity or something like that, right? He wins, right? He wins. And I honestly don't know how many people outside of his inner circle really believe that if America doesn't take over Greenland, China or Russia are going to. I don't even think he believes that. But again, I am just absolutely amazed at just the bold-faced falsifications that are coming out of the White House regarding Greenland, Iran, Venezuela, Minneapolis, other places. They have no qualms whatsoever about openly lying and yet still remaining in control of the conversation.
But Michael, I mean, to what extent? I mean, we have to consider. I think we would see a very, very different reaction if it weren't for Ukraine. If it wasn't for the fact that, obviously we've got the war going on there, that Ukraine still and Europe need US support there. Although I'd read now that the majority, in fact, Pyotr, you might know, you seem to have a thing for all things military, but it's the bulk of intelligence now going to Ukraine is actually coming from France. I was reading a couple of days ago, which was sort of quite interesting. So things are starting to shift there. Or so it would seem. But I think that this is what is the strategic, all the way through, this is the strategic calculation. Europe can't afford to alienate the United States because of Ukraine. Trump knows this, and those around Trump, more to the point, know this, because, I think the reality is we can all see now Trump isn't, he's not the sharpest tool in the box at the best of times. And there are obviously issues there with health and mental decline. So this is the people around him, this is the Vance, this is the Hegseth, those, Miller, who are coming up with a lot of this strategy. And they hold Europe in complete disdain. Europe has given them every reason to hold it in disdain. But Europe has panicked about what this will mean for Ukraine. And so, but I do wonder if we are getting to an inflection point now that, even a week or two ago, I would have said that if Trump had done something on Greenland, I think it would have come along with the United States saying, listen, this is how it is now. We control it. We'll organize a referendum. We'll know where it's going to go, but it's ours now. And if you think of any sort of retaliation against us, we will simply pull out all of our forces from Europe. You will be on your own. And that was my big fear. I actually felt that NATO could hold if the United States tried to take Greenland, because Europe would be so terrified of that they'd essentially roll. I think Denmark would leave NATO. You
ran through a scenario, didn't you? You said, maybe.
Yeah. I really would have. But a week on from this, Pyotr, I think that finally things are starting to,
How many times are we going to say this, James, though? If I can be devil's advocate for a second, right? I know people don't want us interrupting, but this isn't just, monologues and stuff. Yeah. We need to be able to debate or counter one another. How many times are we going to say this? I've been live streaming with you guys for a year and a half. I've known Michael for 3 years. I've known you for 2.5 years, right? Never met in person, by the way. Right, despite me wanting to meet. I wanted to meet this guy, guys. And then Jen's like, oh, sorry, I can't. I don't want to meet you. So it's like, oh, okay.
What was that? Sorry, you lost me there.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just pretending to the viewers that you didn't want to meet me. No, you very much did.
I did, but Pyotr, you knew that there were there was some very, very good reasons why we couldn't meet. Yeah,
he's moving house. But no, we jokes aside, I was basically saying, though, that we've had so many of these potential inflection points. This is it. Europe has to wake up to the reality.
Yeah, I know.
Like, how many times are we going to go through this? This is why I read that tweet from earlier, right? How many rounds are we going to go through around the Ukraine peace deal? How many times are we going to go around this with Europe having to wake the hell up about the reality of the United States and stop hoping that in 4 years' time, much to Michael's credit, we're not going back to a new, the old days.
But the messages, Pyotr, surely have, I felt have been a lot tougher in the past 24 hours coming out from Europe. Less circumspect about things.
But enough messaging, James.
To be honest, it would have had a hell of a lot more power if they weren't bloody messaging on Twitter.
Yeah, but I don't think banning Twitter helps either.
I think it's a nice first symbolic step. That look,
Well, no, actually, to be fair, Axe did capitulate. They did comply with the UK government's requirements, which I was impressed with.
Yeah, anyway, so you can only do it if you're paying for Twitter now. Not really. I'm all for a ban on the horrible. I
think you have to play the game as it is, not as you wish it to be.
Well, no,
that's why you're the pragmatist, and I'm the pragmatist, and you're the liberal, right? We've got the merch coming out, everyone. We've got merch coming out. We've got a t-shirt, we've got a mug, working on the final designs. James is this difficult
lack of a pragmatist or unprincipled. Sorry,
modify pragmatism.
Sorry, Pyotr, I've got to say it. You know my feelings on it. It's awful. But I think that Europe has, and in actual fact, there was a very good. I don't know if we can pull it up, but I was reading yesterday that we're hearing a lot of people saying that Europe can't do a lot, and I'll just sort of check on it. But there was a very, very good over on Blue Sky. For all those who know where they should be these days. But it was a very good piece actually from Jeremy Cliff, who used to be write for The Economist. He's now with the European Council on Foreign Relations, who wrote a very good thread yesterday or the day before, in which he sort of said, look, these are all the things that Europe can actually do. And he laid out a number of different steps that Europe could take to retaliate against the United States. So, there are serious answers there, but it's just a question of, is that political will there to do something? But, I'm not sure. Have we seen, because, of course, there was the emergency council meeting taking place this afternoon in the European Union to discuss all of this.
Another meeting. Fantastic. More bureaucracy.
Well, but calling it's an emergency council meeting called on a Sunday, that's not another meeting, but it is another meeting, but it's been held on a Sunday afternoon to discuss this. So if it comes out and they say nothing but fine words, then Pyotr, your skepticism and cynicism will be justified. But it will be interesting. I don't know actually if we have got any news that's come out of that. I mean, I should imagine it's probably too soon now. It started.
We can about the meeting itself. I can monitor that. If I can just make one last comment, and then I'll get Michael in, because he's I'm sure has that US centric perspective to enlighten us on. But I think that my main point is that Europe needs to act. I want to see things happening, and I understand your point that more meetings are being held and the tone of the language is changing, which is granted good. But at the same time, we need to see actual policy change. I think what was notable, you're correct, that the French have actually surpassed America in certain contexts of intelligence sharing for the Ukrainians and the war front. But my concern is the ability for the Europeans to really replace the American provision of logistics, for example. So back in December, there was a NATO exercise, which was led by the French. The British, I don't think, were involved, but it was primarily a continental NATO exercise in Romania to see what could or couldn't be done. And what became very apparent was the amount of deficit of intelligence sharing that existed without America's involvement. And not even if you bring in Britain, the Canadians, or other Five Eyes and the French or whoever, would be still enough. So I think what Europe needs to be pragmatically doing is trying to find a way to keep the US on side whilst taking the necessary steps to decouple. I had a conversation with General David Petraeus last week about this very thing, and I asked him about the idea of decoupling, because how easy is it for Europe to either de-risk itself or decouple itself from the United States in the important theaters like military production, like intelligence sharing? And he sounded more positive than I expected. I don't know what you think about that, Michael, if you've got any thoughts on how Europe should be taking those steps.
I mean, look, if France is taking over the logistics over Ukraine, then that plugs up a hole that many people in Europe are fearing, is that we need to keep America on board so we can keep this thing going on in Ukraine. But I mean, are you willing to give up Greenland to preserve what's left of Ukraine? Are you willing to effectively violate Denmark's territorial integrity, to still fight for, I guess Europe is still determined to restore the borders of 1991 in Ukraine? Good luck on that. I mean, at this stage of the game, I mean, I guess I'll play the realist in this idea. Ukraine's lost. Okay, Ukraine is done. It's gone. You can continue to fight as long as possible, but
all of it.
Russia is not losing this war and Ukraine is not winning. Okay, that's a statement of fact. Okay, Russia is not losing, Ukraine is not winning. They are not regaining territory. Putin is basically still taking town after town in eastern and southern Ukraine. They have all but cut the power and all of the energy. I think there's like 3 energy grids that are still functioning in Ukraine. And Ukraine has no longer. It's no longer front page news. Everyone is talking about Venezuela, the possible color revolution in Iran, and what is going to happen with Greenland. Ukraine is desperately trying to remain a relevant hashtag at this stage of the game. And if NATO is willing to do nothing, if Trump makes a move towards Greenland, then, I mean, the whole reason for NATO's existence comes absolutely into question then, because if they can't even defend one of their own members while fighting a proxy war to prop up another country that they have said is not going to get into NATO anytime soon, then I really question whatever leadership exists within Europe to counter the reckless realpolitik of the United States. As I said before, the first thing that needs, I don't even know why there needs to be an emergency session. All that needs to happen is Rutte needs to say unequivocally, you make a move towards Greenland, we invoke Article 5. Okay.
Well, apparently, so Mark Rutte spoke with POTUS regarding the security situation in Greenland and the Arctic. We will continue working on this, and I look forward to seeing him in Davos later this week.
Fantastic! You once again stoked his ego.
Kicking the can down the road. I think
control of the. You've
absolutely. And for all the maggots, the idea that Trump would be going along to Davos, which. I seriously, long ago, although it's gone a bit quiet recently, but I did go through a period where I immediately knew that the second anyone mentioned World Economic Forum in any of their sort of comments online, that it was just simply not worth taking their comments seriously at that point.
Just you're a conspiracy theorist and you believe in the globalist World Economic
Forum. Yeah, exactly. So the second anyone said WEF, it just meant, right, okay, you're not a serious person to be... Yeah, to be talking to. But it is amusing, isn't it? That, of course, Trump is going along to Davos. So,
and he'll be treated like royalty over there.
Yeah, stroking his... Well, yeah, I think so. I would like to think that this is the moment, sort of, he starts getting a bit shunned, but...
I think, personally, to me... this essence of kicking the can down the road, I hate this analogy, but it's so popular amongst policy circles in Washington and Whitehall and all the popular areas that we, the amount of times I'd hear it in a consultation or a lecture at a sort of CSIS or Brookings Institute. Well, it's a case of just kicking the can down the road when it comes to resolving Iran or Ukraine or anything like this. And it's this problem, which is that sort of, it's always the case in Europe, let's hand it over to the next person. That being said, something that I did sort of want to weave into the conversation a little bit was a very interesting article. I believe it was it was in the Financial Times. It was an op-ed I was reading last night on the plane. And it was basically discussing the idea that when we talk about Europe, one of the biggest European skeptics has always come from the right? The Marine Le Pens, the alternative right, or the far right, the hard right. What seems to be changing, though, is that actually, and the reason I wanted to bring this in is because we had a couple of questions. This one summed it up. Could we potentially see a greater federalization of Europe, right? Towards
I saw that comment. Very interesting.
But the op-ed in the Financial Times was basically arguing that some of the biggest proponents of a potential federation of Europe are now the hard right. The very people, and I'm not saying that they're all hard right, but Giorgia Meloni, right? She's the best example. She's been in power in Italy for I think she's got an election later this year. She's been in power for a good 2 to 3 years. She's been one of the biggest advocates for working through the EU systems. She's been one of the biggest advocates for Ukraine. Interestingly, despite people calling her a fascismo, which I think is grossly insulting. Yes, she has some very strong domestic policies, but foreign policy-wise, she's actually been pretty constructive and pragmatic. And I don't like her necessarily approach to Trump, but she's engaged Trump in a way that she knows will work with him. I think it helps also because she's a lady and, well, Trump being what he is. But, she's been quite effective at that. So point being is that we're seeing such a threat by Trump that we've even got some of the biggest Eurosceptics, these more, Meloni types, the Marine Le Pens, the reforms, they're looking at the EU as being like, well, screw this. We've got to ensure our own protection. Let's bolster the EU through greater federalization. It's crazy, but it seems to be happening. I don't know if you guys have seen this. If you think it
well, yeah, interestingly, some of the toughest voices, yes, have been. I mean, of course, the one that bucks the trend on all of this is the UK, where Farage still seems to be sort of doubling down on Trump, and there was an absolutely atrocious op-ed piece in the Telegraph, just basically saying, hand over Greenland to Trump. It doesn't, Europe can't keep it. Give it to Trump.
What about the idea of an EU army in all of this then? That's another repeating question I'm seeing here being raised by Backyard. I personally sort of think that the idea of an EU army is a bit redundant if you still have NATO. Or could it be that it's bled more?
But people have been talking about a European army almost as long as the European Union in its previous incantations, to which proponents of NATO say exactly that. You don't need a Euro army. We have NATO. If NATO has a major internal rupture and either Denmark withdraws or the United States withdraws, or if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know how far this went, I know that there was a bill introduced into the French Parliament to withdraw from NATO. I mean, I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but I heard about this. In order for an EU army, you have to disband NATO. I mean, you have to get rid of NATO, and you have to then realize that the United States is no longer the one that is the influential hegemon. Is that Europe has to act in unison. We've also have heard about proposals to federalize the European Union for years, and every major treaty, the Maastricht Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, I mean, it gets us closer to that. But in order for that to happen, states would have to effectively give up their own sovereign decision making. Mm-hmm. And so I mean, we can talk about Meloni. It's surprising that Le Pen would think something like this, but there's going to be opposition for sure coming from Central European countries, Eastern European countries, perhaps, definitely more central. It's an idea, but in order for that to actually happen would take cataclysmic events in order for that to become a reality.
I've always been pro-European, but never a full-blown supporter of the EU. To me, the EU moved too fast and too far in its expansion years. When the A8 occurred in 2004, the A2 with Romania, Bulgaria, I think that we should have spent more time ironing out the issues that existed within the European system, the deeper European system, before adding more countries of grossly different cultural, economic development, and so on. That's why I'm quite against Ukraine and Moldova joining. Not because I don't think that they're European or don't deserve to join, but because they're not in a position to join and they would threaten the European project. It's very simple. Ukraine is a huge country with a grossly underdeveloped economy, unfortunately, and this is before the war. Corruption is still a huge thing. I'm not getting into whether it's worse or better than Russia, just as a fact, it is a huge issue. Moldova itself has its own issues with its security. The polls I've seen have said that they maybe want to unify again with Romania. So it's these sorts of just pragmatic issues that for me is quite where Macron, again, I'm sort of fanboying Macron a little bit, but when he suggested this idea of a tiered system, this idea that you have a core hub of the strongest economies and sort of the innermost circle, then tier two, or outer circle, which is sort of like countries like the UK who want to be part of the system but not the financial currencies or whatever, and then tier three, which is more like the Ukraines, the Turkeys, or something like that, and then you can apply to get further in and further in. But as it stands, it's a problem because the EU has this monetary policy which works, but the fiscal doesn't. Now, there's been this idea of Euro bonds or EU bonds being released for a long time, but there doesn't seem to be enough coherent policy on that, partially because you have to federalize the union to do that. But I know, and I certainly don't want a United States of Europe. I think what makes Europe so amazing is the diversity of the independent nation states. But now we've got a threat on Greenland. Is it inevitability at this point? You seem to have thoughts.
Well, I mean, I think, the federalization argument was one that was being had quite a long time ago. And Pyotr, you point out that, you know, instead what we move to is this idea of a multi-speed Europe, and a lot of discussion about what that could mean in real terms. Would we have a core of countries which would follow the entire suite of policies, if you like, and then other countries that could sort of come and go on that? I mean, people like Andrew Duff, who was a former sort of British MEP, has put forward ideas of associate membership, which would be that second tier, where you could sort of pick and choose, but so you'd be involved with some things but not others. I mean, you know, a lot of this would need to be worked out, but I think there is a good rationale for this in all sorts of ways. And obviously the UK being outside of the European Union, I think what we are definitely seeing in the UK now is a rethinking of that debate. I think all of this is sort of hitting home now. You know, we know that, you know, and this is a favorite topic of mine, we know that Brexit has been a disaster, but I think what we've been seeing with Ukraine, what we're seeing now with Greenland, I think is really hammering home the point that, you know, a lot of the people who supported Brexit were sort of trying to backing the United States, saying, listen, we leave the European Union, it's all right, we're sort of great friends with the United States, it'll all be okay. And that's backfired you know, quite seriously, as we're seeing at the moment. And so I think that this is now actually really igniting that debate that the UK really needs to rethink its ties with Europe. And of course, one of the things where I think most people would accept that, you know, I think Britain leaving the EU actually did a lot of harm to the European Union. I know a lot of people would say it was a troublesome member. Yes, it was, but it still gave a certain amount of sort of economic and diplomatic clout. But I think on security, it is right up there with France, as traditionally one of the two big countries in Europe when it comes to being able to sort of, you know, supply security. Obviously, the UK armed forces have decreased in size quite radically in recent years, but I still think that this is something where there is this understanding, and I think it's a real debate that's been had in Europe now. There also needs to be a discussion about Turkey. And where Turkey falls into all of this. It's a very difficult member in all sorts of ways. But if we're talking about trying to come up with a coherent European security strategy, then one way or another, you're going to have a debate about what that means. You know, do you bring Turkey in? Do you leave it out? What do you do with it? So I think there are some huge questions on the horizon, but it looks like we're definitely moving in the direction where, you know, those debates are being had.
Yeah, I mean, well, Mike, if you've got any other, I could whittle on about this all day. So,
I mean, I'm still wondering, so what's the end point here? I mean, we can wax ideas about what Europe needs to do or what Europe should do, but we also need to come to reality about what they absolutely most likely will do.
Yes, exactly.
And that is, I mean, unless I am very wrong.
Down the road.
I mean, you know, I mean, well, I mean, they kicked the can down there. Look, I don't know whether this is the most rational or whether this is the most reckless, but they just hold the fort for another 3 years and assume that when Trump leaves, if Trump makes it to, you know, the end of his 4-year term, there's lots of reasons why that might not happen. But if he makes it to the end, that suddenly people think that we're all back to normal again. That presupposes a Democratic victory in 2029. It also, you know, assumes that the embedded, entrenched political culture that MAGA is becoming, and they are fragmenting. There are various MAGA movements within the United States. Yeah. But please don't think that this is an internal conflict. They are just simply accessorizing. There are various, you know, people tend to think that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene is now suddenly a voice for reason, simply because she's dissenting from Trump. Marjorie Taylor Greene has never backtracked on any of her previous positions or wild conspiracy theories, but people tend to think that as soon as there is dissension within the ranks, that this whole thing might unravel. I don't see that. I honestly don't see that. As long as there is no organized opposition beyond just simply thinking that, well, the midterm elections are going to make things a lot easier, and all we have to do is just focus on someone like Gavin Newsom, who will run and restore. Gavin Newsom is basically blue MAGA at this point. I have very little faith that he is going to do anything different, let alone be popular enough to get elected. We also need to take this into account as well. The electorate within the United States is shifting, right? Older generations that would previously just simply go along with the status quo are aging. Newer generations, 40 and younger. I mean, the one thing that keeps the system still going in the US is that the younger generations just don't vote. Because they feel that there is no point in voting if primaries already decide candidates that are not to their liking. However, this is now becoming more and more of a litmus test, especially for Democratic candidates who are going to be asked, what is your position on ICE? What is your position on Palestine? How much AIPAC money do you take? All of these things may not, change the dynamics immediately, but the electorate's opinions are definitely changing as well. Trump knows this. The MAGA groups know this. And that is why they are so active now in trying to entrench themselves for at least the next 10 to 20 years. We saw this years beforehand with Mitch McConnell. I just think Mitch McConnell is kind of like the unholy evangelists bringing forth MAGA, who worked tirelessly to stack the judges, stack the courts with all kinds of, pro-corporatist, pro-Republican, anti-regulation judges to change the dynamics of where we are right now. So, where we see, we're focusing, a lot on Greenland and what Europe can. And Greenland is just part of a larger topic of the Trump administration using the United States as a way of saying, this is our opportunity to change the geopolitical face of the Western Hemisphere. And if there is no credible opposition coming our way, do it now, right? Just get it done. And yes, as James mentioned, if Trump manages to change this around, who cares how people see him in the present? He will be remembered as somebody that expands, right, American territory. And it does. And I absolutely agree also, with what James said before about how he sees everything as a real estate game. He sees everything as business opportunities. For him, the geopolitical story of justifying, Venezuela's human rights problem thing. Maduro was blamed for trafficking fentanyl. And then when he was captured and brought to New York, he was accused of, trafficking cocaine. They switch the stories all the time. It doesn't matter. What matters is just simply controlling territory to feed into. If Trump has one foreign policy goal, domestic foreign policy, I think is very simple. Neoliberalism in one state. And it requires overseas territories to feed that market, of which he has, he's also talking now about assigning people on the executive board to his, I forget what the whole thing for Gaza is now, right? He's thinking of some kind of business plan.
He wants to turn it into the Riviera.
Right. So this is how he sees this.
But what was it? There was a report that he wants $1 billion from each country that wants to sit on the board.
Yes,
well, Tony Blair's been appointed on it, which always knows it's going to go very well then.
Right. Yes. But can I just jump in and say, and tied to all of this is that, so when I put up the announcement on my community tab on the channel for today's live stream, it was quite interesting that, there were a couple of people who were just saying, good riddance. Why, as Americans, why do we care? Why should we bother what Europe thinks about the United States if it wants to? We're fed up with paying for Europe. And I sort of keep coming back to this, that I think this is a very, very short-sighted view, but it's it reflects Trump's transactionalist money oriented view of the world, that Europe is just, we pay for their defense enough. They've been scamming us. We don't need them. And I think it ties in with that thing that Michael was sort of saying in that Monroe Doctrine again, of spheres of influence, and the United States saying simply, we will just control all the resources of the Western Hemisphere. We will sort of shape our economy around that. I think there's a lot of people in the United States who think that Europe is a dying continent anyway. It's unimportant. It's not the big thing. Asia's the big thing, but that's going to be China. So And Africa I think a lot of people just sort of misunderestimate the value of Africa. I think, Africa has a lot of potential in it. But I think to the fact that Trump's never been to Africa, there's absolutely no interest at all. We've seen that, the devastating cuts in aid to Africa. It just simply isn't on the horizon for the Trump administration, apart from maybe a few spots where there are, some potential minerals. But essentially, I think what we're seeing is Trump just simply remaking the US economy and thinking, we'll just focus on the Western Hemisphere and be, the rest of the world be damned.
Well, that's sort of what I was talking about, the 84 analogy, because you have the different blocks. We are firmly, I think, in a return to regionalism. I had this conversation with Martin Wolf of the FT in December, where we were talking about a rejection of globalization in its entirety, although you can argue whether or not globalization ever fully existed, because most countries have often traded usually with their closest partners, but just geography is that important. But the point being here is that you see these three great powers. I know people are going to be like, well, Russia's not a great one, but let's go with this theory that
it's up there. Just I know you guys look, just make your peace with it, okay? It's Russia, China, America.
I personally think you have to treat Russia. Okay. You have to take Russia seriously.
Seriously, Michael, I'm not buying the theory that Russia is a great power. I mean, its economy is nothing.
You can't ignore it.
I think it's I hate to break it to you. It's holding its own. You know what? It didn't collapse the way that
I stayed relatively quiet on the whole Ukraine commentary from Michael because I was not entirely sure what to make of that. But no, I think it's important. Well, I think we should pivot to Iran for the last half an hour. But I would close with my little tidbit, which is simply that we know what Europe should do. It's quite clear that Europe needs to be taking the necessary steps to be hoping for the best, but planning for the worst. It's not that complicated. We need to be de-risking ourselves from American industry. Parts of Germany are doing this with the production of defense equipment. Britain is doing this in its own ways. But the problem is Europe needs to be consistent in what it says and what it does. Because at the moment we have a double standard here where Europe is saying, we said it when we had our mammoth stream after Venezuela, where Europe is unwilling to directly call out the actions of the US over Venezuela, but at the same time still try to placate them and be like, well, we hope that the transition of Venezuela will be free and fair and everything. And it's like, no, guys, they've literally just annexed the country, kidnapped or seized the head of state, as much as a bastard he was. Either stick to your principles and call out the US in the same way you call out the Russians, the Chinese, whoever it is, or suck up to America and stop, saying the things that you criticize. You can't have it both ways. And this is why I think a lot of countries just don't take Europe seriously, be it over Gaza, be it over Iran, be it over all these other countries.
We shouldn't be seriously having any sort of conversation about Russia as a great power. It's not. It's not. The reality is, as Pyotr has just said,
not a great power.
The reason that we would have this.
I hate to break it to you. If Russia's a regional power, it is not. Is it a world power? No, it is not a world power. Is it a regional power? Reality dictates. All right,
I think that the point that Pyotr was making is spot on. That the reality is that Europe should be there. We should be talking about Europe as a power, and a power that can present a very different model. As you know, that this is something I passionately believe in, a different model of the great power politics of the 21st century, but it can't get its act together. So,
as I said, Europe has the capacity to leverage smart power. We have that ability if we get our ducks in a row. Again, this is a very idealistic outlook, right? I'm not pretending at all it's going to happen this simply. But what we should be doing is getting our military independence sorted. We should be defining much clearer which countries, like India does in its strategic autonomy, which angers loads of people, including many Europeans, over its willingness to host Putin but then neglect Ukraine. But that's because India does what India wants to do. And Europe needs to be a lot more shameless, I think, in standing up for that. We have, the ability to establish this EU trade agreement with Mercosur. That's a huge amount of economic opportunity.
Absolutely.
We should be doing a hell of a load more with Africa. If the Russians are going to exploit it for military gain, the Chinese are going to utilize it for, that's a feature of StreamYard, everyone. If China's going to be doing economic stuff and America's just going to neglect it, then Europe, we can offer economics, we can offer security, we can offer so many things to our nearest continent, Africa, the only continent that's set to grow demographically, well, properly, right? Other than parts of Asia sporadically, right? And Europe we're being so short-termist. We need longer-termist horizons here. And I think it's this inability to, like what we've seen with Iran, right? I used to pivot, right? In the past 2 weeks, we've seen some of the worst protests in Iran's history, and Europe has been largely silent. They've been largely indifferent, saying, we support Iran's right to freedom. Okay, guys, that's great. What are you doing to actually help? Enough statements. But the situation in Iran, just for people who aren't aware, the country has now been in a blackout for the past 10 days. There are concerns about a return to digital isolation, which basically means that they will be cut off from the internet for good, and people will only be granted access to the broader internet, global internet, if they pass the verification checks. So Iran is shifting a lot more to like a Russia, Chinese, or even North Korean model at this rate. And obviously the regime has accepted or admitted the savage killing of at least thousands of people on the streets on the 8th and 9th. And now we've had this diplomatic blowback from the US with the Gulf states saying that they, basically lobbying US not to get involved. The situation in Iran is very tragic and everything, but I think we wanted to touch upon this briefly.
Pyotr, you're right.
Then that's,
I think, Iran, it did look as though maybe we were a moment of change, that the protests were growing. They're the most serious protests we've seen since the revolution in 1979. But you're right. I mean, it's gone under blackout, and it looks like, essentially in these situations, we know that it ultimately comes down to the police and the army and the security apparatus. Do they take is a regime willing to do anything and everything to remain in power? Well, it was clear that this regime was. And then would the security apparatus then support that? And it looks like they have. We know it's a standard thing that if you want a revolution to succeed, essentially what you need is that, at the very least, you want the security apparatus to step back and just simply say, look, this is not our fight anymore. But here it looks like they've come down and supported the regime. And so from what we can tell, it does seem that the protests, the regime lives to fight another day. Sadly, tragically, but at a very, very high cost. But what has been noticeable is that these mass waves of protests have been getting larger and larger, and with shorter and shorter gaps between them in recent years. So how much longer the regime, what I think will be really interesting is, it did seem in recent months that there had been lots of signs of liberalization, that the regime understood that something was bubbling up underneath and was trying to respond by easing things up. And then we got these protests. What I think will be really interesting is to see how much longer this digital isolation lasts, as you said, whether this is just a short-term thing to get them through and then get a peace and quiet and then open up again, or whether we're now going to see a much, much tougher approach, and whether, for example, we could see the return of the morality police onto the street, the enforcement of hijabs and things like that, and really the regime just saying, look, we're here to stay and we're going to stick with it, and we're going to take a zero tolerance approach to any dissent going on from now. And of course, the United States, after having said that it was going to take tough measures, has done nothing.
I've got lots to say on this. I literally came off an interview before we got onto the live stream. So I don't know, Michael, you haven't said anything. I don't know. I'm curious. You maybe have some different thoughts. You've been observing for a moment.
Look, the regime has to change. The regime has to reform. It has to modernize. It needs to secularize. If the morality police come back, if the mullahs continue to run the country, they are literally operating on borrowed time. I mean, that's it. The only thing that might have saved the government is that the United States and Israel came down so much in favor of the protests that this was seen as the protesters were supported by outside elements. And whether or not you want to go down that rabbit hole about whether these were CIA or Mossad orchestrated protests, the fact remains clear. The government is not popular. The government is not popular. But just because the government isn't popular, just because it still is holding on to power in whatever way possible, does that give other countries the right to topple the government? Because what is going to, who or what is going to replace them? Who? Pahlavi? The Shah? I mean, I hate to break it to you, we went down this road before, folks. I mean, this is a horrible reboot of the 1950s. If there were credible opposition within the country, that might be one thing. And again, all that it takes is for a push by Trump to try to, remove the government by force, by military means. And suddenly the country plunges into chaos. Libya, Iraq, Syria, we don't need this. We really, really, really don't need this. If the government lives to fight another day, which, yes, it does seem like the protesters are subsiding. I don't know. Things could happen again. The government could also do something incredibly stupid to rile everybody up again. So I'm not saying that it's over just yet. But it was a couple of days ago where I went to bed thinking that I would wake up the next morning hearing Trump had launched strikes. It looks like, the airspace was clear. And I wake up the next day and suddenly Trump decides I'm not going to do that. And, him saying that, well, I decided my own. No, he didn't decide on his own. I think people told him, hold off on this right now, because this is something that once you start, you don't have the resources to continue investing in. We spent time on this program before talking about how big Iran is, territory-wise, military-wise. You would need boots on the ground in order to achieve that goal. Just like we talked about with Venezuela, you would need physical boots on the ground to change the government. You can't just simply get rid of, the Ayatollah or the, Maduro and expect everything else to fall into place. And so I guess in that sense, the government got a lifeline, but they absolutely, positively must change if they want to survive.
I think there's a couple of things here I would say to this. So the guest I had was a gentleman called Trita Parsi. He works for the Kinsey Institute, and I think he said a couple of things that mirrored what you said there, Michael, which is that, at the end of the day, the ability to see this through was never going to happen, in the sense of the US getting involved, the US intervening, although I was pretty clear it was never going to be a large scale operation. It was going to be limited airstrikes on certain infrastructure. But ultimately, what does that lead to? That leads to a negative fallout, potential risk of regional conflict again, which is why the Gulf states were very concerned by it. But also, the Islamic Republic just takes it out on the Iranian people. So ultimately, it does nothing to actually topple the regime. It only angers them even more. And even the prospect of this has led to these developments now anyway. And as far as I can tell, this is a regime that its back is up against the wall as much as it has ever been. In June, when they launched those airstrikes against Qatar, right, the massive airbase of the Americans, I think it's like 30,000 troops, right? They literally told the US a few hours before, we're going to hit this site at this time, get your people out. That was about as clear of diplomatic signaling and illustration. We don't actually want to escalate and have a war with you, but we are going to strike back because, you've hit ours and our nuclear facilities and stuff. So in this case, they're not going to do that, because they learned, I'm talking from the Islamic Republic's perspective, they learned very quickly that the Israelis and the Americans were itching or maybe the Israelis particularly itching to continue this. And why wouldn't they? from their perspective, this is the golden opportunity to deal a decisive blow to the biggest systemic threat, at least for the Israelis, in their entire history. So now we have a regime which is even more hardline than it was already, a regime that is even more on the back foot because they have no air defense systems. The economy is shot. The people are more and more willing to take these risks. So now, as I say, all I care about in this instance is most of all is the Iranian people. And the situation is dire for them now. They have no water. The economy, 1.4 million rial to the dollar. And as you say, what does this lead to? An entrenched conflict where the US gets bogged down in a quagmire, because this would never be an absolute resolve operation. You're not, the literal geography of Iran does not dictate that you can jump into Tehran, pull out Khamenei, and you're done. This is a long, drawn-out conflict which would cost thousands of American lives. No one has the appetite for that. And so this limited operation leads to what? Limited outcomes, of which no is not favorable to anyone. So I don't know where we go from here. Iran is more peripheral, it's more sidelined. Who are the main actors in the region now? The Saudis, the Turks, the Qataris with American backing. The power dynamics in the Middle East seem to be changing incredibly quickly. And all because Israel is really, and this is where I am pretty critical of Israel, are with Benjamin Netanyahu's maneuvering in the ultra-nationalist government, all with the desire to seek dominance or eradicate any threat that they perceive to be against Israel's interests, even to the point where America's like, we're not sure how much we can get involved. I don't know what happens now, to be honest with you. I think it's really worrying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I'm just trying to work through in my mind exactly where, what exactly is going on all of this, because look, Israel is an important actor in all of this. We know this. There was a war in the summer. Israel did a considerable amount of damage. But then you sort of look at this, and on the one hand, you think, right, okay, does Netanyahu still? You get into the conspiracy theory realms, which I don't actually think are terribly conspiratorial in this case. That Netanyahu's probably looking at it and thinking, that Islamic regime is probably the best thing that I've got going. Keep it weak, but keep it there is more valuable than maybe getting rid of it and having a new regime that comes into place. And it was very, very interesting, this whole talk about Pahlavi and as the former crown prince sort of perhaps making a return. It's a very, very interesting debate on all sorts of levels, and I probably don't want to go into too much detail on it, but whether he would return as Shah or whether he would be there to oversee some sort of transition to a more democratic system. But of course, you could imagine a very different Middle East if you had a new Iran, which was secular democratic. I have to say, though, that, and I don't necessarily like the reductionist element of all of this, but, the idea of democracy doesn't tend to run terribly deep across the whole of the region. You're very, very hard pressed to find many Middle East countries which are democracies. I think Israel is one of them, although highly, highly tainted these days because of what Netanyahu's been doing. But nevertheless, if you could imagine an Iran that was completely transformed, it would change the dynamics of things enormously. I don't think you would see Hezbollah completely annihilated in Lebanon, but you would see it dealt a very, very serious blow, which could potentially lead the way to it. Hamas, I think still obviously gets some sort of Iranian support, and then you've got the Houthis and things. So I think we would be talking about a very, very different Middle East with a secular democratic Iran.
But it's not going to come. It's not going to come from Pahlavi. It's not going to come. Come on, he's an American citizen at this stage of the game. They see him as a puppet. If that happens. Pahlavi.
Oh no, I absolutely agree. No, I just thought it was very interesting that suddenly he was being talked up, and that they were saying that crowds in Iran were shouting his name and things like that. And it just didn't really ring terribly true to me. You know, the one thing I think, you know, you could argue is that in the absence of an opposition figure in Iran, because obviously you can't have an opposition figure in Iran, in the absence of it, then it became interesting that he did become some sort of figure that they could latch onto, that would just simply say, look, here is somebody, and whether they would then, you know, and he went to quite strong lengths to say, look, I'm not proposing I would return as Shah. I don't think he sort of counted it out by any means, but it was a bit more subtle than that. He say, what I want to do is come back and sort of shepherd the country towards some sort of referendum on its future.
What legitimacy does he have?
You know, where exactly, but, you know, where I think, you know, a return of the Shah would be, you know, the king would be one of the options put on the table. I have to say that it sort of was quite interesting to sort of consider that, you know, there have been cases, of course, where monarchs do return. There's, you know, sort of lots of cases where, you know, they've had pretensions to return but haven't actually done so. And so the Balkans is a very interesting part of territory for this, because, of course, you know, after the end of communism in the Balkans, in actual fact, you know, I can remember the Karađorđević family in Serbia sort of talking about making a comeback. In Albania, you had the wonderfully named King Zog, his son, Leka, who, a towering figure, wanted to make a return. But the interesting one was Bulgaria, where in actual fact, that probably presented the best model, where their former king Simeon, who'd been forced to abdicate at a very young age when the country fell, you know, to the USSR effectively, he actually returned and became prime minister. And I think that was probably you know, at the very minimum, that Pahlavi sort of saw himself as doing that. Well, maybe I could do that and then have a referendum to sort of return to the monarchy. But I think anyway, all of this debate has been pushed to one side. You know, from the looks of it, as I say, I think.
Well, it's not. I think it's a moot point at this point, because the protests were very different. They were hugely driven by economic considerations, not just social, as in the case of 2022 and Mahsa Amini's killings and that of the morality police. You had communities of people across the country which were not involved in protests in the past, people from the middle classes, merchants, people who don't want to jeopardize their businesses and get involved with often, which can be more fringe protests, right? The ones with the loudest voices, the ones with the strongest opinions have the loudest voices, right? So there was that difference, I think, in these protests. But now in the reality where the Reza Pahlavi is a nice guy. I had the opportunity to ask him a question once in Washington a few years ago, but I think he does not represent the full monarchy. Monarchists are a small fragment of Iran. A lot of Iranians are largely indifferent. They just want a better system. That doesn't necessarily mean a return to monarchy. And I think if Reza Pahlavi was ever going to sort of come back, it was going to be as a sort of transitional figure towards whatever Iran could be, more secular, federal or something. But the problem with all of this is that there is not a clear, coherent government in exile kind of thing. Like it makes me think of Russia in some ways, right? Because you've got a lot of intellectuals, you know, Kasparov, Khodorkovsky, people who live around other parts of the world, but there's not a united front. Belarus, it's slightly different. You have the government in exile, and they were quite clearly recognized by some people. But because there's no recognized alternative to the Islamic Republic, it doesn't give a unifying figure for Iranian people to sort of congregate round. And therefore, the protests as an entirety were quite fragmented. This is always the case. There's never a sort of clear leadership figure. So they then struggle to keep that momentum. And I think also, given just how well the Islamic Republic are good at suppressing these kinds of movements, it doesn't. I mean, Artesh, the military, was involved in these ones for the first time, but the first time in actually trying to protect the regime, not support the people. Usually they don't get involved. They're like, we're an external borders thing. That's up to the Basij movement and the IRGC to take care of these internal political, moments of dissent. But even they got involved. So if you're not going to see the military turn on your side, as we've seen in Latin America when those pivotal moments of revolution come, it doesn't go anywhere.
That's
so,
it.
yeah,
Well,
I
and
think Iran,
reform needs to come from within. Reform has to come from within, as far as Iran is concerned. I mean, we've been waxing ideas about, put this monarch, the Karađorđević family in Serbia is just widely ridiculed. I don't know a single person that actually thinks that they should change the country to a constitutional monarchy. I mean, they're there.
No,
they're there. I mean, if they're in the news, the crown prince is constantly made fun of because his Serbian is so atrocious because he's been living in the UK or wherever it was for as long as it has. I think, and again, this is just my own hot take on all of this, is Khamenei is not young. He's, very much up there in years.
85, I think he's
in his 80s. And so maybe, he might not be long for this world, or he might step down as Ayatollah. That could potentially be an opener in Iran. Let the, Khamenei retire and gradually, but very definitively, de-Islamify the government, get rid of the most hated elements, the Guardian Council, the morality police, all of these things. I mean, when I was in Uzbekistan, I had a number of colleagues that went to Iran for spring break. And what they told me was, outside of, the major religious cities like Isfahan and Qom, people are absolutely secular. Women are in northern Iran. They're not even wearing their headscarves. They're just in absolute defiance against the state, basically telling them, come on, force me to, veil up again and we'll protest in the streets. So this is a government that is absolutely, and if they're smart enough about this, they absolutely need to take this moment to reform. They can stay in power. It can be a modified, gradual reform and opening up. But if it is outside regime change, they will double down, and nobody will see any outside appointed official, especially if they're backed by Washington or Tel Aviv, as anything legitimate.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I'm just reading through the comments. I thought for the last 5 minutes we could have some reactions to some of the comments.
Yes.
Just on that last point, look, we saw this with Raisi. He was the guy who was killed in the helicopter crash almost 2 years ago, and he was replaced by Pezeshkian, who is this more moderate, quote unquote, reformer. Yes. And, in many ways, Pezeshkian did try to be more constructive in the early days of the protests, 2 weeks ago, by sort of acknowledging the grievances and saying we will work towards that. And he was chosen because of the amount of corruption, ineptitude, and mismanagement by the Raisi government, who was more hardline. So you're right, I think, in that it will only come from within. I personally would prefer to see, greater election choice for the Iranian people. But, I'm not advocating regime change because it doesn't ever lead to anything productive. That's not what we are doing here. But, yes, I like the idea of a constitutional monarchy. Someone I think even wrote in the comments, let's shift to the comments. Someone said, I would be like to resurrect the Romanovs for Russia. I mean, I personally could always imagine having Russia being a constitutional monarchy. I think it would have been awesome. But, that's my idealistic thinking. James, apparently you had a horrible take over Serbia or something. the Balkans. Someone said you had a horrible take. I was also called an emperor. Apparently, Michael. I'm trying
Some
to
cheeky bugger said that I could remember Franz Ferdinand as crown prince.
James.
Seriously, whatever.
Marxist. I think we know it on this.
Well, we don't. Yeah, seriously, all that. Well, my take on the Balkans, I didn't see that one, but anyway, I'm not quite sure what. Apart from mentioning the fact that, these monarchs wanted to return but didn't have much success except for Simeon.
Michael, you're an Islamist.
I support Islam. What can I say? From Denmark, of all things. Denmark, I was defending your territorial integrity over Greenland, but apparently...
Although I saw that, Pyotr, you and I got called up for not taking on Michael's bad take on Ukraine, but I think anyone was probably watching us sort of like, yeah, no, we're not buying that, but
Michael
I
is a
don't
weak
fancy
man,
having an
not
argument about it today.
Michael is a weak man. We should troll James throughout this chain stream, excuse me. No, I think we should rename the title from Two Liberals and a Marxist to a monarchist, liberal, and Islamist.
Oh, well, apparently on one of your guys, it's one of your sort of like James has a horrible take for everything. James have a horrible take for everything.
Just horrible
is that one of your stock?
James, horrible take for everything. No, that's one of Michael's.
Yeah.
Is it? It's not on yours as mine. All right, it's one of Michael. Michael,
no,
you own that, chappy.
Maybe we could rename this 3 horrible takes. There we go.
Yeah, 3 horrible. Horrible
the Marxist is just for clarity, everyone. So the Two Liberals and a Marxist joke that I made in my stream post was it was a comment from one of the earliest days when someone said that James and I are kind of liberal, classic liberals, and what was it you said, Michael? You were saying something I guess again about communism or Soviet times, and someone just called you a communist. So we sort of
I don't remember, but I think it was something about how. But there was somebody in the comment section that said, here I am listening to 2 liberals and a Marxist.
That was it, wasn't it? It was somebody that sort of rather stuck. I noticed you didn't push back on it. I own, that I'm a liberal to my very core in sort of traditional sense. Sort of liberal internationalist.
I'm a pragmatist. I'm more of a pragmatist than I think you are, James.
Pyotr, I think we've worked out. No, you're unprincipled.
I'm the doomer in all of this. That's the reason.
Principlist, liberal, and
the opposite of the unprincipled is the naive. I'm the naive liberal internationalist.
The Europhile, the one who believes that Europe can do it. This time, Europe is going to do it. Absolutely.
Europe's going to do it this time. We're going to do it. That's right. I promise this time or the next, or maybe the next time, but one of these days we'll do it.
James, okay, we've got 2 nice. When James turns pragmatist, we know the world would have gone mad, but then someone else nicely said James has the best takes on everything.
Thank you very, very much. And and liberalism is not to be scoffed at. Absolutely, I'm with you.
Someone said, sorry to quite say it out loud, but they thought I said 2 nipples on a Marxist.
God, we've got to that point of the evening or the morning or the afternoon. All right, okay.
Well, you can see, guys, this is what we're like after the stream ends. We all go out for a pint virtually, and we are
for our 604. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. A liberal interventionist, a doomer, and a amazing. Well, I like this last one. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know, guys. If we have any final thoughts, I don't know. We can wrap it up for this week or this.
Hey, it's only January. Who knows what's going to happen in the next coming weeks.
We've still got half a month to go.
Seriously, I mean, it's been look. We were also going to talk about a year of Trump. We'll just sort of, but it is amazing. We're coming up for 1 year of it, and it has been, and we haven't even touched on the domestic situation in the United States and the craziness that's going on there. But it has been a troubling time, and I think
we're 5 minutes early. If we want to have a quick fire round of
one thing I'd say, which really the standout for me anyway, is from the first Trump term was that the first Trump term was clearly chaotic, and there was very little by way of a thread of thinking. This is sort of chaotic, but not in a disorganized. This is chaos of a very organized type, with bizarre, ridiculous people behind it who don't know, who've got very, very worrying views of the world. But there seems to be an intention going on here, which I think is terribly worrying. And we're just 1 year into this. What more can we see? And I know there's a lot of thought, well, maybe Trump won't see it to the end of the term. And I think that, to my mind, the really big question in all of this is going to be, what happens if we do wake up tomorrow and it's a President Vance?
But why would Trump not make it to the end of his term? I don't understand.
There's talk about, there's talk about his health deteriorating.
Yeah, illness.
He's not well.
Well, it's always there. Even what was it? Robert Kennedy said he didn't even know how Trump was still alive given his diet.
But when I haven't, considering everything happening foreign policy wise, when has there been in any news big considerations about Trump's health? It's no different to when it was.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's there. They see
it's constantly been talked about that are we now starting to see real problems emerging with his health? He's rambling more and more. He can't keep focused on things. And he's soon to turn 80, and apparently his diet is absolutely shockingly bad.
Well, I guess, given all the news on foreign policy and just relative to how bad Biden was visibly, I just haven't seen as much description of it. Maybe the media is suppressing it for sense of
doing it. They're doing it. We've had a history of presidents that were in serious mental decline that the media covered up. So this is not the first thing that's out there. Reagan was certainly not doing well in the last few years of his second term. Woodrow Wilson suffered a debilitating stroke, shortly after the end of the First World War. So, look, he might not make it. He could make it all the way to the end. He could be in the midterms. We could see a changeover in Congress, and considering what's been happening, just within, Minneapolis is just the main headlines that are happening right now. The militarization of ICE, turning it into what many people see as his own private military force here. I am genuinely worried about the next few years, and it is not contingent on Trump. I honestly feel that many of the people pulling the strings behind him are the ones that are standing closest to him. The Rubios, the Vances, the Hegseths, the Millers, they see Trump as the dancing monkey, the entertainer. And they are positioning themselves to effectively entrench the MAGA movement for the foreseeable future. Absolutely.
Well, I don't think that should come as a big revelation, Michael. I think it's pretty clear that Trump is the face of MAGA. When he was younger, he obviously has created this cult of personality. And so the system now has to play around that. But to him, quite clearly, the national security strategy was written by the likes of the Vances, the people who are thinking about post-Trump MAGA, right? The same as we're thinking about post-Putin Russia, post-Trump MAGA. And I think you've got two main camps now. We've got the isolationists, the idiots who thought that Trump was truly isolationist, the Marjorie Taylor Greene types in one camp. And then we've got the Trump interventionists, the Vances, the much more aggressive ones. But then we have the third element, which I think is interesting here, which is Rubio in the past couple of weeks has really taken a much more strong mantle, not just because it was about Venezuela, but I think you could see a scenario where him versus Vance run, because I think
absolutely,
Rubio,
absolutely, yes. That's the big battle, isn't it?
But I think Rubio can. There's a meme I shared on Twitter of a dam, and the dam is Rubio, and he's holding all the extra shit from MAGA is basically what it shows. So I think that Rubio, if he plays his cards right, could appeal enough to the more traditionalist Republicans, the more moderate Republicans. On the other side, though, with the Democrats, right, what do you have? Who leads the Democrats right now? No one. The only person I can think of having any potential stance in 2028 is what? Gavin Newsom? What? Kamala Harris gets dug up again and shoved in front of people? What about Hillary Clinton? Who are the leaders in the Democrats?
There's been a major internal struggle within the Democratic Party for years. An emerging left-wing progressive movement that the establishment does not want. And the Democratic Party leadership does one thing very, very well. They emphasize that they are the party of order and they are the party of the elites. And that is what they do. And so, Hillary she's past her time. I think Kamala does not have the appeal. They are talking about Gavin Newsom. I don't see him being nationally appealing, but no, I don't see anybody right now, especially when the party leadership is, as I said, doing everything possible, everything in its power to prevent the more left-wing progressive movement from going beyond just a few key cities.
Well, some people have mentioned.
I think also you've got the other problem.
We've got, if I can just bring in names here, we've got AOC, people are saying. The other one is, of course, Thomas Massie, who's being the head of this sort of anti-war faction of the Republicans. What, Massey's going to run against Vance and Rubio?
I mean, I'm unfortunately, I don't see it, but the person who always impresses me the most for just sheer eloquence and being on top of policy is Pete Buttigieg.
I knew you were going to say Buttigieg. Oh my God!
But the reality is, no. But seriously, no. I'm not saying that he's in with a chance. And there's all sorts of reasons. I don't, frankly, Michael. With your history, I in the United States, I don't think the US is going to elect a woman or a gay man. But that's just the reality. Unfortunately, I think. But push aside whatever preconceptions you have, but just listen to him talk about policy issues, and he is by far the most eloquent and absolutely detailed person in US politics. It's seriously impressive to hear him talking, but I don't think he's got, but that would be the person, if you said to me, serious player, somebody who could reintroduce an element of having a president that people could look to who actually takes an interest in policy and really engages on things. And, he would be the standout figure in my mind.
James, I'll give you this. Europe will stand up to Trump before Buttigieg gets elected.
Yeah, no. I said that. I mean, I fully recognize that. But what I'm saying is, if anyone outside of US politics or outside of the United States who wants to see an example, when they say, US can't produce sort of serious politicians who can, he's the person I really, it's so impressive, but he won't get anywhere near the levers of power, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Pete's not doing a good enough job of pushing himself in front of it. I completely forgot he existed, to be honest.
Well, I mean, it's a bit difficult because he doesn't hold any official position. And I think this is the great failing with the US system, is because of the way it's structured, that it comes down to running for presidency. You don't have the party leader system that you have in most democracies, where it's run from parliament, the executive is chosen from parliament, so people actually have time to get to know the leader of the opposition, and you have that very clear figurehead that people then, that doesn't happen in the United States. So it's really difficult when you're out, you're several years out from the next presidential election. There isn't a single figure. It's lots of figures fighting to try and, jockey for some sort of media attention, running into the, start of primary season. And it's a really big problem in the US system.
Well, that's why I think it's so problematic, because that he doesn't stick himself more in there. If he doesn't hold a position of political office, why doesn't he be a much more vocal, independent commentator right now? Keep himself relevant, right? That's what Trump was doing when he was out.
Well, he does, but it's, he's not a governor, he's not a senator, or member of Congress to be able to do it in quite the same way. So it's trickier. But he's certainly the one that, independent party.
Blinded by Buttigieg.
The great thing, the United States land of choice and everything, but you only get two political parties.
Okay. Buttigieg wants us to rage on behalf of the machine. I mean, the guy, I'm sorry. Maybe I am blind.
He's too left-wing for a Marxist.
You like Buttigieg. I'm sorry. I can't do this. Yeah, James. You know what? I'll give you this one. You know what? I can think of one scenario. I can think of one really good scenario in which Buttigieg wins. And that is, he makes his way to the ballot. He makes his way up to the top. And, 3 years later, we are so sick of anything coming from the Republicans, MAGA, Trump. It does not matter. We need to make that the fourth guest. We'll call the fourth guest the spare tire. It's really the only way I think that he would.
Okay, well, we started this when the sun was still up. It's gone down for me now. That's why my screen's so bright. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for these, everyone watching. I always enjoy these streams. I don't know. I think America is in for a tough time. I think we'll know a much clearer pathway after the midterms. Maybe we should just have a US stream at some point. We don't always have to keep these streams to more contemporary events, but so many things have been happening that, maybe that's why we do them. But anyway, everyone watching, thank you very much. Appreciate it. James, Michael, I don't know if you have any other, takeaway remarks?
All good. Just wishing everyone a good week. See what another week brings us in the chaos of.
And just so everybody knows, at the end of the day, when we're done live streaming, the three of us chat for another 20 minutes, just, recapping everything. At the end of the day, we are good friends and, colleagues here. So, at some point, the three of us are actually going to be in one spot and have, pints.
No, it is, we do have different opinions on stuff. I'm not entirely sure what Michael's is, to be honest, but James and I have no, I'm kidding. No, we do this, because we enjoy it, and in the time, Michael. Actually, I would actually just say quickly to everyone, Michael is, making a change to his channel. He's going to be doing more of his own commentary. I watched his update, and I would encourage you to, go out there and check out what he has to say more, because he used to only do it for transcriptions or transcribing the direct translations of Russian elites, and I think it's good that you're joining me and James in doing more of your own personal commentary, because I think
going back to basics, back to what I was doing beforehand. You got to remember, my full-time gig is university professor, so this stuff takes, unfortunately, a back seat. I'd like to do a little bit more to it. But yes, there is some changes coming to the channel as well. Yeah, absolutely. Unless there is like a major, unless there's like a major event that some of my viewers are like, "Are you not translating anymore?" If there's a big thing that's coming up, yes, I absolutely will provide the translations for sure.
Yeah, no, but someone's asking me for a link to your channel, so let me just.
Yeah, it basically is my name, Michael Rossi Palisai.
Yeah, it's no, but I think there's YouTube more broadly is going through a big shift. Everyone,
huge.
I have been saying this for a while. The link is now in the description or in the comments. But yeah, basically, YouTube's going through a big change ever since August. You have to understand that a lot of channels are facing a lot of challenges from AI. I myself just got through a bit of a legal battle because someone was trying to take my interviews, dub them, and make it that I was the fake channel because the original content was actually in a different language. So there's a lot of risks to creators or professionals, whatever you want to call it, when we do these things. And streams are a fun way for us to, I think, sort of get through it in real time and talk and stuff. So, do support everyone you can, not necessarily through money. I'm just saying, just be supportive and understand that there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes.
James, a lot of work goes into
elements. I just stick a camera up and talk in front of it for 20 minutes, but James takes a lot of time to meticulously create, refine his videos, and Michael with all his editing and stuff for the transcription. So these streams are an opportunity for us to sort of have a little bit less of a formal engagement. But anyway,
But I like the idea that, we started out as 3 separate channels, and, Pyotr, to, everyone, so he knows, Pyotr, to his credit, reached out to me, what was it, about 3 years ago, largely talking about Central Asia when I was living there, right? I've known James, professionally within the academic world for years. His stuff on Yugoslavia and Kosovo, he reached out to me a couple of years ago. I gave a lecture at Rutgers about parastates in Kosovo, and I saw there was a comment, is that actually James Kerr-Lindsey's? I was like, shit, wow. So, now the fact that we have this 3-way conversation here, again, thanks to Pyotr, I like doing this stuff. I mean, I like doing this more than the individual videos and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I look forward to doing this stuff all the time. And yes, we look like we, sometimes argue, go back and forth. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you can't respect everybody, you're not going to do this, right? And I have nothing but praise for Pyotr and James for everything that they've done and bringing the 3 of us together to talk as well. So, we're all friends.
Good outlet.
Yeah,
from my perspective, like, my intention has been ever since I lost my career thanks to Trump. So I've largely focused on YouTube now, and that's what I do. And first time listening, thank you very much, mate. That's what we're doing this for. And the last point I'd just say is my intention is to bring different groups together. We've joked about the communists, but we do want to find a 4th person. I think it'd be fun to have someone who can join us on a rotating basis or something. What was the joke you said? The spare hammer or something?
Spare tire in the clown car.
Yeah, we can. We can get Nathan Webb's spare tire. Or something.
I did love that spare tire in the
was
clown
great.
car.
Great.
And Alex Wall, thanks so much. Great that you sort of were able to join us and listen in on it. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah,
we have been talking about findings. So any serious suggestions?
Yeah, serious suggestions. We welcome it. And yes, I am straight. My girlfriend is in the other room, probably wondering what the fuck I'm talking about on the internet. But anyway, I shall see you guys in a couple of weeks, I guess, or maybe we'll do it next week. Who knows?
Unless there's not another clusterfuck around the planet, but you know.
Well, that's the other thing, right? This is why we've decided to bring these back, because things are changing so much. And I think our last stream was a little bit heated, but that was just because we're all trying to friggin' understand what the hell's going on. And, you know, we're all trying to just, you talk through each other sometimes when you don't intend to. And it's very intense. But anyway, thanks a lot, everyone. See you soon. And
have a good week.
Take care.